Our guest, Suzanne Meyers, is a powerful advocate for following your own intuition, even if all the messages around you are polar opposites. Like many of you, Suzanne has a child with special needs, in this case, dyslexia. We know that one reaction to having special needs children is often shame because we feel responsible for these differences. However, after focused reflection, Suzanne realized that self-judgments were a waste of time because her daughter needed her to find solutions. How she faced her daughter's needs contrasts with how she herself was brought up. So don't miss Suzanne's heartfelt introspection on how the teacher-centered education and upbringing she received affected her in the long term. When her daughter's school system was dismissive and uncooperative, she explains how she finally had to become the expert on dyslexia to find the solutions her daughter needed. We're going to hear how the education she chose for her daughter and the practices she used in her own teaching classes were 180 degrees from her own schooling. I believe you parents listening will learn to trust your own instincts more faithfully, and you teachers will perhaps be more open to partnering with parents for the benefit of the children. I think you're going to be amazed at the journey this mother had to take because of her daughter's challenges and the incredible job of modeling she did, which now results in a grown professional who's her own best advocate, and instead of seeing her dyslexia as a hindrance, sees it as a secret weapon. You'll find other fascinating conversations like the one you're about to hear at Doodles with Donna, and activities that address all different learning styles like the ones that successfully moved Suzanne's daughter from a 3rd grade to a 6th grade reading level in 3 months. Now, take out a pad so you can make notes on the gems Suzanne shares with us about her experiences. Suzanne, welcome. First, tell me, Suzanne, tell me about where you grew up. You live in Connecticut now, but where did you grow up and what kind of schooling did you go to when you were younger?
I grew up in New Jersey. I went to a very traditional public education, from preschool to high school. And then I went to college in Pennsylvania at Bucknell University.
And you moved to Manhattan at some point?
I did after college graduation and worked there for a number of years and then Connecticut.
So in Bucknell, what kind of education, what did you study there?
I studied economics. It was really more of a decision because I didn't know what else to study. Yeah.
And then did you find a job in economics?
I found a job in banking, finance. Yeah.
How many years were you working in banking?
Probably close to 10. Although, I never felt like that was my real interest or calling.
Interesting. Yeah. So you lasted 10 years. What did you feel your true calling was?
Well, I'm still trying to figure it out. But after I had children, I stopped working for a while. And then
we could specify you were working in the house.
Well, that's true.
Yes, okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And then I really just fell into preschool teaching. It really had not been on my radar. I ran into the director of the preschool where both of my children went to school, and she needed some part-time help. And I ended up being there for probably 8 years. And that felt a lot closer to what I loved doing and what I was supposed to be doing.
So let me go back to Bucknell for a minute. What kind of, and you said in primary and secondary, it was fairly traditional, which means that you were sitting in straight rows and the teacher was talking most of the time and you took tests and you were expected to graduate or do well on the test and then graduate well and go to college, right?
Yes.
I'm just establishing your background, that you grew up in a very teacher-directed environment, that you had the traditional East Coast career-minded upbringing, and that affected you on a very profound level because without having the opportunity in school to explore your own passions, you chose a profession that you weren't really enthused about, and that seems to be really a shame. So was your experience at Bucknell different, or was your education there the typical lecture format of university classes?
It was more the same, and I felt very let down by the education, actually. And I knew that while I was going through it, and really as soon as I graduated, it was very much based on how much memorization you could do and how well you could spit it back. And I could do that very well, actually. So I did fine. But I really believe I didn't learn anything in the classrooms because as soon as I memorized it and regurgitated it, I forgot it. I think I got a bigger education from the social side of just being independent having to problem solve. That kind of growth I got from college, but not the content education.
And Bucknell was liberal arts college,
It
wasn't it?
was. Mm-hmm.
And you took a lot of other courses. How did you fall into economy? Was your father an economist? Was he in business?
My father was in insurance business, and he was the driving force for my education. His parents were first generation from Greece, and he was the first in his family to ever finish high school and then go to college. So education was a huge value and priority for him. And he really directed, and pushed us to education. He also felt that for a woman, it was just really important because they needed, to be independent and not dependent on someone else for their living and for their future.
Incredibly progressive, I have to say. I wonder if you've instilled that in your daughters. I'd love to come back to that, but first let's go into your experience at university.
Okay.
In Bucknell, you had a liberal arts education. And what's unique about the States, because it doesn't happen in all countries, is what you're saying, the social side, is that at 18, all of a sudden you're out of the house and the parents really don't expect you to come back.
Yes, so, very true.
Yeah. Now there's a little more of that because of the financial situation, but usually
out of necessity.
But parents in the States have the mentality where they have the children from 0 to 18 and then they're gone. And parents are fine with that. And that's not how it is in Europe. You probably know that.
Mm-hmm.
So you learned a lot of the social skills, but you didn't learn a lot of the social skills in school. And I'm specifying that because one thing I'm doing, you probably know, is that we're trying to make a bigger push of presenting opportunities for students at the youngest level to learn more social skills because they need to know how to go out in the world.
Yes.
So I'm fascinated by that.
Which, it's something that we really do in preschool. I mean, it's all about the social skills. Yeah, and it seems to be forgotten once you get into elementary school and middle school.
Let's talk about it a little bit because I know we're jumping ahead a lot, but it is a really important point that in preschool, there are so many different skills that the teachers present. And then for some reason, first of primary, first of elementary school, they go to incredibly traditional teaching most of the time and assume that the child knows nothing when in fact, they're very skilled in a lot of different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about the methodology that you used in preschool?
Yeah, I mean, I think in preschool, it's a lot about exposure and opportunity. And in presenting it in very fun ways that feels like play, but there's really, like you said, a lot of skill building, the social skills, as well as those fundamental skills of math and language and critical thinking. So for our school, the school that I worked at, typically a teacher would get to the class before the students arrive, and we would set up maybe 4 centers. And one would be something that had to do with fine motor skills, maybe just put out old wrapping paper and scissors to develop that. And another would be, dress up imagination. And another might be something with problem solving, anything from puzzles to building blocks with the idea of let's build a city. So there wasn't, first of all, this whole you can walk in and choose 1 out of 3,000 toys to play with. It was a little bit more focused and directed, but again, presented in a fun activity or environment.
Well, that really helps that you're being so specific because I work with English teachers all the time who ask me how they can create learning centers for their time with the students. And what you described are centers that are not only easy to set up, but they can promote linguistic skills in any language. Did they use these only in the morning or all day long?
Yeah, so that was sort of how they came in. That happened for maybe an hour, and then we transitioned to a group time where we all said hello and how we're feeling, and then also some sort of learning went on. We might do a weather chart one week, or a chart with heights of the students, or the question of the day: do you have a waffle or pancakes for breakfast? And again, you could be, if you're charting it and seeing how many like the pancakes versus waffles, you're getting some math in. And it wasn't just that. We really tried to promote sort of open-ended questions, not just, do you like a pancake? but why do you like a pancake? How does it feel? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it fluffy? Is it, to get them thinking.
Okay, so that's perfect, because that was my next question, higher order questions. Where you're saying open questions, I would say higher order questions. The direct questions are, what did you have for breakfast today? And the higher order question is, and what if that wasn't in the refrigerator this morning? What would you have done? Or were you working with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds?
2, 3, and 4.
2, 3, and 4. Because what I forget is in the States, preschool is not part of public education, is it?
That's right. Yeah. And those open-ended questions that you're talking about, we use them a lot with art. When they created a picture, you never say, oh, that's a beautiful painting. It was, what were you thinking when you're painting this? I see you used a lot of red. Why did that color, interest you? And what else is red? To get them thinking and making connections.
First of all, I'm so impressed with the use of higher order thinking questions in preschool, Suzanne. I try to encourage preschool teachers all the time to use them, and they're reluctant because they think their students are too young. But you intuitively understood that lower order thinking questions, direct questions, was not going to push their thinking sufficiently. So what you did is you gave them one opportunity after another to expand their minds, even at very young ages. And the second part is the praise. You were very specific in what you said to them. That's the best kind of praise, because when you just say, oh, that's gorgeous, or that's beautiful, or how sweet, it means nothing to the students. And it actually delays learning because they don't really know what you mean. So when we're more specific and when we point out specific parts of their work to encourage them to develop more, then the learning goes up, because then they understand what you're focused on and what they did. What you're also it sounds like you did, is you're integrating a lot of the learning. So you're bringing in real life situations into the classroom and you're encouraging them to think about it. And you did interdisciplinary things, math and graphs and food and probably clothes, all of these things.
Yeah, I know. I did a lot of cooking with my preschoolers. I would maybe find a book about apples, and then we would talk about all the different types of apples and talk about the differences and similarities and taste the differences. And then we would make applesauce, and, even the measuring, you're getting in a little math. And, there's also a little problem solving. Well, what if I put in twice the amount of sugar?
Yeah, they'll be jumping all over the place, first of all, but I'm not sure if the teachers there ever talked about methodology. I'm really into the word methodology because I'm trying to sort of broadening the practice of different teachers by adding different elements into everyone's practice. We don't have to follow one methodology, but what you're talking about is what they do in Waldorf very often, is they do real world activities in the classroom, like cooking. And that simple activity can be something you do for 3 weeks. And as you say, it's measuring, it's math, it's nutrition. Science. Yep, perfect. Is this something, again, you did intuitively, or did the teachers help you create these activities?
To be honest, it was more intuitive.
So what it sounds like is that even though you yourself had a very teacher-directed education, you intuitively knew how your students would respond to information presented in really inclusive and holistic ways. And it's actually what any parent or teacher can do if they're given permission to trust their own intuition, right?
You know what, though? I mean, I have to be really honest with you. Part of what drove me is I would get bored if I just said, here's some paint, go paint. So it was also to make it interesting for me.
That's what I try to explain to teachers. If they're bored, the students are going to be even more bored. But you also looked for stories, which made more connections. And we all love stories. Till the day we die, we are going to love stories. We learn through stories. So that was brilliant as well.
Yeah. I used a lot of felt board stories. Are you familiar with that?
Vaguely. And why don't you explain them?
Yeah. I mean, my mother was also a preschool teacher, and she used a lot of it. And then when she retired, she gave them to me. But you have a big board that is made of felt. And then your story characters or whatever are also little pieces of felt, and they do stick together onto the felt board. So it just is different means of telling a story. But the kids really seem to like that. And also I could get them involved. We had, again, getting back to the apples, I had one about an apple tree. So they each got to put an apple on, and then they could take an apple off. And you're also getting some math in there by adding and subtracting. And you could also do songs.
No. Again, it's brilliant because we learn through movement. And with the felt board, you let the students stand up and touch something and put, and, and stick something. It's just it's the sound sensory experience and the touch, getting up and moving. I mean, I try to explain to teachers all the time that we learned through movement from the time of conception. Our mothers moving around in their little tummies, we learned. So what you were adding was movement and participation and prediction, that sort of thing. What I was going to say is I'm still fascinated by how you ended up in economics. I was just speaking with Kim Anderson a few days ago, and she's big into travel, big. And I know that you love to travel, and you are the best travel agent in the world. You should have done it professionally as well.
Should have.
And I think, we both grew up on the East Coast, and my family was very traditional also. And I asked my father if I could take a gap year. We didn't have that term then, but I needed a year to figure out what I was doing before I went to university. And it was not in his bandwidth. He could not understand that. So I went right to college. But I'm wondering if you had that opportunity to take a year and just sort of explore yourself and your interest, whether you would have taken a different path in university. Have you ever thought about it?
I have thought a lot about it, maybe in a little bit of a different way, though. I felt like you go to preschool, you go to elementary school, you go to high school or middle school, high school, and then in our family and in our town, you go to college, and you're on this path that's just been given to you that you really didn't think about, you just followed it. And then I remembered very clearly after college graduation, there was no path. And I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff. And I really did not feel equipped to make the decision of what was coming next, because everything had been prescribed for me. So I do think there would be such value in the gap year to try something different. Or if you can't have the luxury of the gap year, my children, and it seems like, today are doing so much more internships and really just getting exposure to a lot of different things. One of the things I think I really would have loved and I really missed out in my life was architecture. Growing up, high school, I didn't even know that was a profession. I had no idea that was, it was either like you became a teacher or you went into business kind of thing, or maybe a lawyer,
Are you doing anything with that now?
When I actually, it's probably 20 years ago now, I did go back to school for it and started taking classes, and I really loved it. But I felt I felt old.
Yeah, no, Suzanne, you're incredibly intelligent and you would have done it, but you were also distracted by home life, I'm sure.
Yes, that was part of it too.
So let's talk a little bit. I feel like we're jumping around,
Yes.
But there's so many things in your life that are interesting. And I want to talk a little bit about what at home was so distracting, because you were very involved with your children's upbringing. There were reasons. So can we talk about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, when I think about, what my calling is, and I mean, that really is raising my children was my number one priority. I had two very spirited, very different from each other children. I think what you're getting at is my oldest, Julie, has learning disabilities. And so a lot of my time and effort went into getting her the most appropriate education for her.
I was just speaking with another person I know, Katie Farinas, and her daughter has a lot of mental health issues. And her mission is to make it more transparent. And her daughter came on and talked about her mental health issues. And she's 14 years old. And a lot of this has to do with social media, but a lot of it has to do with just people not being aware of symptoms. Julie had dyslexia. Is that right? Or
Yes. Yes,
and she has. I should say she has.
Dyslexic.
Okay.
Yes,
because it never goes away. No matter how much you treat it, it never goes away. All right. So can we talk about what the symptoms were when you found out that she had this, and what happened on her side and what happened on your side?
I think Bruce and I recognized some of the signs very early on, and a lot had to do with just basic comprehension of the basic ABCs and the small sight words, and when other children were picking up on reading those simple books, Julie was not there.
At what age was this?
You know what? To be honest, I think I started seeing it at 4, definitely in kindergarten. I remember sitting down with her kindergarten teacher and I said, we need to talk about dyslexia. I think that there are some signs there. What do you think? And I was just shooed away. And this continued for many years. Oh, it's developmental. They all develop at different ages. Don't worry, don't worry. They all catch up. And it's true. I mean, to a certain extent, there is a spectrum of when kids develop and start reading and start writing. So the first thing I want to say, I do think it's really important to go with your gut, because as a parent, you really do know. And I'd say kindergarten through third grade, we did just give it time, and we did just say, okay, these are the experts. They know what they're talking about. But I started seeing the gaps more and more, and I started seeing a little bit more of a knock to her confidence, which is really what I think got Bruce and I into action. And then we pushed for an educational assessment. And so she was, diagnosed. They didn't, label it as dyslexia, just some learning disabilities.
So if I can just intervene for a second, because teachers really are not prepared for this, not trained in dyslexia. And very often one of the misconceptions about a student with dyslexia is that they have vision problems. I don't know if teachers ever told you something like that.
Absolutely. We went that route as well.
So you're saying it's very important. It's critical to be an advocate for your child, as long as we do it passionately and respectfully, but it's absolutely essential.
And not only an advocate, I think before you could be an advocate, you need to educate yourself as much as possible. And so I did become an expert in learning disabilities. And so I was able to ask the most appropriate questions, the most relevant questions.
Do you remember any of those questions you started asking? It's a long time ago. How old is Julie now?
She's 30. Sorry.
That's okay. But you did do the study, and you did go in prepared to speak with the teachers or the administrators or whomever.
Yeah. And then, once a plan was put together, this is probably the biggest thing I learned that I want to share, is that in these educational plans, you need really specific, concrete goals. The ones in our school system were very vague and very subjective and left to the special education teacher. And so what we found the first year or two of her receiving services, she was just sort of pushed along. Where had I known to say very specifically, she'll increase her reading with this objective test versus just with, the teacher saying she knows 5 new sight words.
And I only know a fraction of what you know about dyslexia, but in general, teachers are not trained in how a student who has this learning difficulty processes information, because that's the challenge, how the brain processes information. And what's most challenging for students with dyslexia is literacy and language-related skills. And it can be corrected by paying close attention to phonics, working memory, and processing speed. And there are teachers who are specifically trained in that type of reading skill, but most aren't, right?
That's right. And so, after really her making no progress for 3 years of receiving services, we enrolled her in a private program. It's called Linda Mood Bell. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's, female awareness. It has a lot to do with sensory learning and imaging. And it's also individualized, which I also think is an important point, that, each person is different and going to have different levels of a disability and need different methods to kind of break through.
So let's just be specific. I do want to make sure that we understand she was going to a public school, but this was after school.
Yeah. And so it actually, she went before school hours and after school hours.
Every day of the week?
Yeah, very intense. And this program, within 3 months, she went from, a third grade reading level to a 6th grade reading level.
And was she in 6th grade at this point?
Yes.
How did Julie react to this emotionally?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because it was really tough on her, even before being pulled out in these odd hours, because again, in our public system, the special services were given outside the classroom. So in the middle of whatever they were doing, someone would come in and say, Julie has to come out with us. And so there was a lot of shame on her part. So that was really very difficult. And so this, in retrospect, if I could take anything away from this experience, and advice I can give, is that confidence is so important to maintain. And what we did was found something outside of school that gave Julie just such good feeling, such good excitement, such good confidence. In her case, it was gymnastics, but it could be anything, any sport, any instrument, any art, so that, well, they may not be the best reader. They could say, I'm the best backflipper, whatever it is. And that, I think, got Julie through a lot of hard times.
Okay, because what I hear you saying is that being pulled out of class was really emotionally wrenching. And there's a lot of discussion about whether they should do that. The schools haven't found, most schools don't have a way to reconstruct that dynamic, unfortunately, because it is mortifying for most students to be pulled out of class when everybody knows why they're being pulled out of class.
At one point, I insisted that the special education instructor be in the classroom so she wasn't pulled out. Well, that was equally embarrassing because she's the only one who had an extra teacher by her side, So yeah, the model is broken and I don't know what the solution is.
Okay, and what you decided to do was find something, some interest of hers where she felt really powerful, she felt empowered and she felt good about herself. And that seemed to balance out the anxiety about the reading.
Yes.
That's brilliant. How did you know to do that? Intuitively?
Yeah, that was intuitive, right. And yeah.
So in sixth grade, she became a more confident reader. What happened after that? Because again, it's a lifelong problem. It's a lifelong challenge, let's say.
Well, in our case, we did take Julie out of the public school system and we had her in private school, something I thought I would never do. I mean, private school was just not in my radar, but it just provided a much more small classroom learning environment where the instruction could really be individualized.
You knew that in middle school, she wasn't going to do very well in the public school system where you were.
Right.
So you anticipated problems and you wanted to make sure that she wasn't subjected to that.
Yes, exactly. Well said.
I try. So she was in private school from seventh grade until she graduated from high school, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when she went into university, into college, how did she handle the challenges of all the reading she had to do?
Yeah. Well, my first answer to that is, something that Bruce and I really instilled in her was to be her best advocate. And I think early on it came from us modeling the behavior because we were in the schools advocating for her. But as she got older, she had that responsibility. So I think in her case, that was her best asset because she could approach teachers with confidence to say, you know what, I need this assignment broken down for me, or I need more time, or I need to have an oral assessment, not a written assessment. I mean, it really came from her and her confidence and understanding her special needs.
Which college did she go to?
She went to Dickinson.
And were there counselors there who were proactive about helping her, or was she really the one who was proactive in all this?
I'm sure there were counselors. I don't know that I don't remember her using them as a resource.
Okay. And in the private school she went to, same question, was there a counselor that you all leaned on, or was this you and your husband?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question because at this school, they did have a program for special needs, and she had a very, very close bond with this one teacher who helped her a lot. But the philosophy of the school was really that any student could benefit from the learning approaches that you would have for a special needs person versus someone who doesn't have special needs. So those learning practices were really incorporated in all the classrooms.
So in other words, learning through different learning styles for everybody. Yeah, this is what I try to explain to all teachers. They always ask me, what do we do with special needs students? And I say it's the same for all of them because they all need different styles of learning.
Absolutely.
So this private school was known for that, was known for more progressive and open learning. And that's obviously why you chose it.
Or more individualized learning, I'd say.
Okay. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this question. If you had not had the means to send her to private school, would you have been able to find something similar in the public school system, or some classes after school that were not so economically challenging?
Unfortunately, I think not.
Okay, so it comes down to economics.
And that's a huge problem. And we're very, very lucky and very grateful that we had the means.
So I'm just going to jump back to college. A lot of times the counselors are incredibly helpful. In this case, Julie, you raised a daughter who is able to advocate for herself, which is brilliant because that's who she is now. Now I'm curious about her professional life. How has having this challenge made her maybe even a stronger person in certain cases because she's had to look for creative means to learn the information for her job?
She really feels that the dyslexia, is her secret weapon now. Because of it, she's such an outside the box thinker. And in her profession, that has been such an asset and really enabled her to be very successful. That's another thing that we really instilled, I think, that it can be looked at as a gift.
I think that's brilliant because in the home environment, you'll absorb so much about how to deal with challenges. And you could have seen it as a problem and you could have seen it as a disastrous. And you could have been complaining about the teaching system, the teachers and the educational system for most of her life. And you didn't do that, it sounds like. It seems like you looked for solutions and helped her find solutions. So now she's a successful professional. Can you explain what she does?
She is in the biotech world. Her company provides cloud-based notebooks for scientists who are doing research and have to, record all their data.
So you knew when she was 4 years old that there was probably something that was a little different that you wanted a little bit of support for in the schools. It was only until she was in 6th grade that you finally found a solution for it. And you're saying, please use your intuition if you see those symptoms in your child. In the end, she has taken the skills that she learned in these private classes and just, been so successful with them. Do you think there would have been any difference had you started when she was 4 years old or 5 years old?
And that's hard to answer, except in a more general sense that I do think the earlier you start, the better. I think you have less chance of it impacting their confidence.
Okay, that's what I was most interested in. It comes down to the emotional aspect of it, that she felt really disconnected from her peers because she really she didn't understand what everyone else was doing most of the time until she was a little older.
Right. I mean, I think in Julie's case and in many, many of these kids' case, they're so smart that they can compensate so well up to a point. And then in middle school, that compensation gets really, your ability to hide it and cover it with other things gets really, really difficult.
Is that because in middle school, there's less of shared reading and more independent reading?
Yeah. Or maybe, just the amount too.
Okay, so Suzanne, 2 more questions. The first one is about teachers, and it's really important for parents to know that teachers do not have the training that they really need, especially when it comes to special needs children. What would you love teachers to know about maybe recognizing dyslexia or other special needs and emotional needs for their students?
I think, like you sort of hit on it, though, there needs to be more training out there for not only, awareness and ability to assess, but like you said, ability to teach. I think the most important thing that we mentioned is really incorporating all those different teaching methods and being aware of all those different learning styles and being able to offer the variety because, one of them will stick. So that to me really needs to be a priority.
All right, so get away from speaking to the children all day and letting them learn, finding ways for them to learn and have more agency in the classroom. The other thing is that you were incredibly proactive as a parent in finding solutions for your daughter in, first of all, trusting your gut, being an advocate with the teachers and the administrators and the counselors. There are parents who feel shame that their children are different. And there are parents who try to ignore different symptoms. And so you have 2 daughters who are now really successful professionals, largely because you and your husband took the time. And also we could say you battled with your emotional feelings about it as well. You didn't see the problems or the challenges your children had, your daughters have, as a reflection of you, but rather something that you could help them work through. Is that a fair way of explaining it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's just that recognition and then acceptance of the person that they are, not the person that you think they should be. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So is that what you would want other parents to really understand, that these are different human beings, different souls? We're all connected. These are different souls. And our job is really to find ways to help them have fluidity in their lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think very late in my life, I learned that there really isn't only one path. There really isn't only one solution. But if you sort of step back and breathe, you could see that there's a lot of possibilities. Yeah.
I love it, Suzanne. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. It's really important, and hopefully it will help both teachers and parents. So I really appreciate your sharing these things.
Oh, thank you for the time.
I personally can't help but be inspired by Suzanne's incredibly thoughtful and studied philosophy of her journey with her daughter. For you teachers, hopefully you now have a list of ways you can create dynamic lessons that further all of your students' learning needs from preschool onwards. And for you parents, the belief that self-education for your children's special needs is your best tool towards finding the most effective solutions for them. You'll find more informative conversations like this one at Doodles with Donna, and activities that promote different learning styles for all special needs students at scaffoldingmagic.com. In the meantime, have fun in your classes and at home, and see you soon for more.